Hello everyone, and welcome back to our advanced leveling tutorials or videos rather, lecture videos. And this unit we will be learning about creating terrains to create outdoor scenes. And Unreal has a nice terrain editing tool, and if you use it properly you will get really fantastic looking outdoor scenes, and we will learn how to do that today. And this is an example of a level that you could create using the terrain editor. Basically you can have flatlands and populated with grass, for example, in this case, and you can have rocky areas, snow on the mountain, and also you can set up static meshes and populate your scene with these static meshes in your Unreal Terrain Editor. And I will be showing you how to set this system up, and that would basically be the content of chapter 8 of your first volume or first textbook, Mastering Unreal Technology. And after watching this video and finishing your class assignment, you'll be able to set the outdoor scene up. Now notice here in the scene I created basically also a water surface, and this water surface is using my material. I use fluid surfaces on it, so for example I shoot it, you will see the ripples on the water. And also I used a physics engine, actually a post-processing module, to basically create the inside of this water. And so if I go under the water, things get blurred out. And so if my player goes outside of the water, you will see that the water ripples go out, and also you'll notice the differences. So now let's start up and creating this terrain. So first off, I'm going to just create a new blank map, and I will save the map that I have here already. So here's your basically your blank map. And what you can do is to set your terrain up. There are two ways to do this. You can go to your content browser, and basically your terrains are like actors again. So you can go to actor classes, and if you follow your steps in the book, the place that it says that your terrain is located is going to be different. The terrains in UDK is under uncategorized, and you see the last option is terrain. When you select that and minimize your content browser and right click, you will see that an option called add terrain here will be added to your map, and you can add your terrain. Another way to set your terrain up really quickly is click on tools and click on new terrain, and then it takes you through some steps. And if you have a terrain level set up, you can actually use that terrain level setup in your terrain or terrain wizard and create it. So we'll set our terrain up from scratch, and here I have my terrain. Now if you click on the terrain and press F4, you will see that your terrain properties would show up, or alternatively you can right click on it and then click on terrain properties. The same window opens up, and in the terrain property you can decide how many patches you want on X and Y to have. So here I made it 128 along X and Y, so this makes a bigger terrain for me. Now next, because this is an outdoor scene, I would have to have a light set up for it. So I click on content browser, open your content browser, go to actor classes, and go to the lights and click on directional light and bring in a directional light. You can either drag it in or select it and then add directional light by right clicking. And when you bring your directional light here, you notice that nothing changes when you move the light, because this is just directional light, and the orientation of your light matters, not the location and the position of it. And then kind of orient your light in such a way that you will get a reasonable view. So here I'm zooming out in viewports, so I will have my materials and my light. Let's move the light in so it's just above the terrain. Now I have my light and everything set up, and if you click on build and uncheck light mask, then you will be able to play this basic terrain, and you can go and play the level. And so as you see, this terrain is basically just a simple empty terrain and completely flat. Now the next step is to add materials to this terrain and also to be able to paint your terrain. And we will see how you can do this in Unreal. So now let's just save this file. Okay. Next up, I want to show you how you can set up basic materials for your terrain, and then I will show you how you can go ahead and make more advanced materials and replace your basic materials in your terrain. There are a few steps that you need to remember to take to be able to set up your terrain materials properly. You need to remember that you have materials. Basically, the materials will have textures and the lighting interactions and everything through the expressions that we learned previously. From these materials, you should create terrain materials. And each terrain material will have one material, basically, and then you can add displacement maps to it if you need to. We won't go to that. And then you can create for each terrain, you can give to this terrain two different kinds of layers. You can give it decoration layers, or you can give it terrain setup layers. The terrain setup layers can contain multiple materials, and as we see later on, we can have multiple materials assigned to a terrain layer setup, and then you can control at what height those materials should show up, at what slopes those materials should show up. And this way, for example, you can have for the flat areas, you can have grass. For highly sloped areas like rocky mountains, you can create a rock material, and so your terrain would show rock materials on there. And then you can have snow materials that would show up at heights above a certain level that you set up, or a certain limit that you set up. So your snow mountains, your snow would show up on the cap of the mountains as opposed to deep in the valleys. And this way you can assign multiple materials to a terrain layer or a terrain setup layer. And then you can also assign multiple static meshes that you can put in a decoration layer, and then you can paint that decoration layer on to your terrain. And we'll see how these each of these will work little by little. But first, let's create basic materials. So right click, open your content browser, and then just go ahead and under so-called the gray area, click on new material, and then I place this material into a DM my terrain packet, my terrain2 package, and let's group this as materials as a grouping function, and then call it base grass material. Okay, and so this will create just a material for you here as a base material, and then you can click on hold key 3 and left click, and this would bring a constant 3 operation, give 1 to its diffuse color, and that would make a green object, and then bring 2 constant operators, and then I'm going to align these operators right here, and I will make one of these at 25% for my specular highlight, and then I make the specular power at 20, and then I'll save this material. Okay, so now under my materials in my terrain, I'll have my first material setup. Okay, now if I use this material will basically look completely green, and I won't be able to see the differences in slopes and the differences of texture wrapping around it. One way to see that is to bring a base texture, and you can go to the engine, Unreal Engine, and click on textures and use a texture, a base texture map or basic diffuse texture map. And here's your default diffuse texture map. Click on it and go to your material editor. Actually, I should open my material editor first. Okay, I'll bring my material editor here, and then I'll go back to my Unreal Engine, and from the Unreal Engine I'll bring the default diffuse texture in, and that would allow me create or use this default diffuse texture as a texture map in my material. So hold down the T, bring your diffuse texture map or your default diffuse texture map, and then hold down the M key, bring a multiply, and multiply your base color or your grass color to this texture, and then create a texture color here. So this is how your texture colored grass would look like. Later on, we'll replace this texture map with the texture maps from a grass texture, and this will let me have my texture colored object or texture colored material. Alright, so now I have my base grass created, base grass material created. You can right click on this material and create a copy of this material, and let's call this base rock material, and then make another copy and call it base snow material. Okay, now double click on base rock, open your rock, and change the color of this rock to a kind of brownish color. For rocks. Okay, and then save the changes to your material, and then double click on your snow and make the color for your snow material basically pure white, and I'll make it 2, 2, and 2 for X, Y, and Z, and then I'll save this material. Alright, so now you have a grass material, a rock material, and a snow material. The next step is that you want to create your based on these materials that you have, you want to create terrain materials. So right click and choose new terrain material, and here I'll make it a under the terrain material grouping, and I want to create a terrain material for base grass, a terrain material for base rock, and a terrain material for base snow. So I call this terrain tmat grass 01. And when you do that, you'll notice that your terrain material or properties would show up. You can assign what would be the mapping type. I'll have it auto, so it automatically assigns the kind of mapping that needs to be applied to it. You can have different scales created for it, and then once your properties is open, go to the materials, click on the grass to select it, and then assign the grass material to the terrain material, and then close this property. And then I'll just go ahead and duplicate this or create a copy of this terrain material and call it tmat rock 01. Open it up, go to the materials, click on the rock material and assign it to this material of this terrain mat, and then go back to my terrain materials, create another copy, and call this one tmat snow. Open its properties, go to the materials, create on your base snow material, and then assign it to the material property of the tmat snow. Now I have created my materials, and I have created my terrain materials. Alright, so we'll be saving all the files that we have created so far. Now the next step is to create a terrain setup layer for your terrain, and there are two ways to do this. One way to create this is that right click in your content browser packages and create a terrain layer setup, and another way is to go to your terrain editor and create a terrain setup layer there. I will do this from the content browser. So right click on your content browser and create a new terrain layer setup, and then I'll put it into terrain layers group, and I call it TLS base layer, and then press OK. When you do this, you'll notice that your terrain base layer setup will be opening up, and you'll see that you can assign materials to it. Right now it doesn't have any materials on it. You can click on add new items, so I'll click on it 3 times to create 3 terrain material slots for it, and then I can assign my materials or my terrain materials. Notice that these materials will be assigned from top to the bottom. So what you want to do is that the materials that will show on top of everything, you want them to be on top. So snow shows on top of the rocks, and they show on top of the grass, so to speak, in this material. So what I will do is that I'll click on the 0, I expand the 0 material, which is the topmost material, and then go to your terrain materials, click on the mat grass, and then on your terrain base layer properties, assign its material by clicking on it. And then I would like the material for snow materials to show up on top of everything else if it's above a certain height. So click on enable minimum height, make the base minimum height, let's say, at 2000 units. You can think of it 2000 meters above the ground level, and then you can give it about like a 5 unit or 10 unit for noise and 2000 for the noise amount. And this way your snow material will show up at minimum height of 2000 with a noise radius of 2000 around it. So that also gives you the probability or the possibility that you may have your snow at the lower altitudes as well. Then I'll close my base material or my snow material there, and then I click on my rock material. Actually, I assigned grass to it. Let me just reassign the snow. Okay, so the snow material is now assigned to material 0. To material 1, I would like to assign a rock. So click on the rock material and then assign it to the material for material 1. And remember, that's the terrain material, not just the material. And then I want it to show up at a certain slope. So I click on enable minimum slope and make this slope at 0.25. Now, the slope is the tangent of the angle of the terrain at that location. So if your terrain is flat at that location, its angle is 0, so its tangent is 0. If your angle is 45 degrees, then your tangent is going to be 1. And if your angle is going to be at 90 degrees, your tangent is going to be infinity. So let's make this actually at 0.1. That means at 45 degrees, your rocks start showing up. Okay? And close material 1 and open the terrain material 2. Click on the grass material from the content browser, assign it, and then open and expand minimum and maximum slopes. Enable both of them. Make the minimum slope at 0 and make the maximum 0 at 1, which was the maximum slope, base slope of your rock material. This way, your rock material and your grass material would overlap. Now close this and minimize your content browser. Now you have set up your terrain here. The next step is to assign your terrain base layer to your terrain object. If you click on the edit terrain mode, the terrain editor, Unreal Terrain Editor, would open up. To the left you have the terrain tools, which allows you to paint hills in your terrain or valleys on your terrain, allows you to filter and smooth out some high slopes in your terrain, allows you to cap some mountains to create plateaus in your terrain, and so forth. You have the setting area that allows you to decide how much of a certain paintbrush you want to apply, the size of your paintbrush, which is the radius and fall off of your brush, and then you can see the properties or the settings of your terrain. Here is called the terrain 1. That's my terrain here. I can click on properties and click on view and so forth and work with it. You can increase or decrease your tessellation of the terrain. The brush is the area that you can paint on your terrain materials and so forth. And at the bottom here is where your terrain layers are set up. Your base setup is your height map. And you want to right click on the gray area, and then you want to go back to your content browser, go to your terrain layers, choose the terrain layer or select it, go back to your terrain editor, right click and add selected layer. If you do this, your new layer that you create here will be created based on the base layer that you had, which is the TLS base layer that I created. And if you expand it, you will see that you will have the terrain materials on the terrain layer, and you have your terrain base layer set up. Now, if I click on the paint tool and create one of these brushes and create a radius and a fall off for it, I can now hold the control down, and by left click I can create mountains while my height map is selected. And you see the height map is selected, so it's basically grayed out, or looks brown. And then if I keep creating this terrain, as you see here, I can paint out my content of my terrain. And the gray area, the green areas are the grass material. These brown areas, brownish areas, are my rock materials, and the snow appears as this white material, as you see here. And you see those snow patches at the bottom here is because of the noise radius that we put it at the maximum radius. So your snow appears at 1000 height, with the possibility of appearing at other heights. And as you see here, your rock appears at 5 degrees angles of slopes, and your grass appears everywhere else. Okay, so next I would like to paint my terrain here, work it a little bit, and once I'm satisfied with the way my terrain looks like, then I can go ahead, design better materials, reuse these new materials in my terrain, and then go ahead and add some more decoration layers to my terrain. So that's what we're going to do next.